Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the National Convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. And it is my great delight today to be hosting and co-hosting with the Faith Ecology Network, the newest webinar in our Kinship series. Today, we're looking at perspectives from diverse faith traditions. So in just a moment, I'm going to introduce all of our wonderful speakers. But before I do that, I'd really like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I personally live, work and play in the beautiful lands of the Cubby Cubby peoples in what is now the lower part of southeast Queensland. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, emerging leaders, and acknowledge that AILA is deeply committed to working in solidarity with First Nations peoples, to decolonising the way Western systems have treated and continue to treat the First Peoples in this continent. And for any of you who know the work I do personally with elders such as Mary Graham and other dear friends, we are really passionate about building a future that enables us to be together in solidarity and to build a really earth-centred future. So that's my acknowledgement. And we have become a bit of a tradition now, I think, in Zoom land. If you would like to write in the chat where you are today, whose country you're on, perhaps you'd like to reflect on any animals you might have seen this morning. It kind of helps us get into the mindset of honouring the living world. And I think today's presentations will help to perpetuate that. So today we will have a number of speakers. I'll introduce all of them now, and then I'll be introducing each one just by name as they pop up. So I'm really delighted that in a moment, Anne Lanyon will be speaking with us. And Anne and I have been collaborating across a range of activities for many years. Anne is one of the creators and supporters and the holder of the space for the Faith Ecology Network. And Anne will tell you a bit about FEN in a moment. And Anne has been helping to organise today's webinar, so we're really grateful to Anne. And then we'll have Lisa Buxton, and I won't read out all of their bios. You hopefully saw that in Humanitics. But Lisa is from Bundjalung and Yugambeh Country, and she's the Executive Officer of Aboriginal Catholic Ministry in the Archdiocese of Sydney and has been involved in Aboriginal education with children and adults for almost 30 years. We'll then turn to Sally Neves. Sally is the Integral Ecology Animator and Mission Ministry Resource Coordinator of the Institute for the Sisters of Mercy in Australia and Papua New Guinea. And then we'll welcome Dallas Campbell, who's been a member of the Baha'i community since the age of 15 and is involved in a range of wonderful sounding projects, actually, and I'm sure she'll tell you more about that. She studied environmental science at Murdoch University and graduated with an honours in nutrient cycling of freshwater streams. I think that's wonderful. Anyway, also delighted to have today with us Mehmet Ozap. Mehmet is a professor of Islamic studies and a Muslim community leader in Australia. He founded and directs the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilization at Charles Sturt University. And last but not least, there's me. I've already introduced myself, but I would like to just mention, for those who don't know, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AILA, is a small not-for-profit organisation. We've been around for about a decade. We're passionate about earth-centred governance and really responding to the call of Thomas Berry through the great work and the Indigenous leaders we also work with who inspire us to think about how we organise ourselves as human beings to care for country. So a lot of our work is focusing on education, supporting communities who are doing earth-centred initiatives, and we have remarkable networks into wonderful people all around the world, particularly in civil society networks. A lot of our time is spent giving talks to students and educators and quiet conversations with progressive governments, councils and others. Lots of quiet work in the corners helping people think through what an earth-centred future could look like. So that's enough from me. What I might do now is invite Sarah to share the slide or share the website for the Faith Ecology Network, please. And Anne, good morning, good afternoon. How are you today? And lovely to have you join us.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Michelle. Thank you very much. So my name's Anne Lanyon, and I just want to talk about myself a little bit first. And I acknowledge that I'm in a part of Sydney that is contested from the earliest colonisation. So I say Guyunggu Bungil land in honour of the descendants that I know here. But as a child, I grew up in rural Victoria, And I remember being close to the land. I loved the open spaces with the gum trees outlined against the horizon, hearing the bush curlew calling at night and wondering why they sounded so scary. Now I live in this big city of Sydney where many, many people never get out into the bush to get to know and wonder about the unique species which have evolved here in the different bioregions across our land, let alone realise that many of these unique mammals and birds and plants have gone extinct. And then 56 years ago, because I'm a lot older than that, I was in a living room in Melbourne with my two small children then and watching the grainy, grand white images of the first human to walk on Earth's moon. Now, thanks to the sciences, we've learned so much more about the relationship between that pale blue dot, Earth, our common home, and its fragility in the vast cosmic sense. When we moved to Sydney, my husband suggested we live near the beach, which you can see in the background there, because of the climate and because it was affordable to us, a young, struggling family trying to keep a roof over our heads. In that time, I've seen how we humans, with our houses, our cars, our lifestyle, our pets, our attitudes to gardens, have displaced what were here before I came, the koalas, the small birds, the reptiles. We've introduced pest species, we've altered the bush and the beaches here. I feel physically that loss in my consciousness, and I can get really upset about it. So I just say, Earth is speaking to us. Earth has always spoken to us as humans have evolved because we're kin with all life. But a key question is, what does it mean to be human? And this is one that religion responds to. Are we listening to Earth now? What is Earth saying? And how can we learn to listen better? This week, Buddhist teacher Joanna Macy died. And she said, this is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger, or the fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. 10 years ago, Pope Francis addressed the world with his encyclical letter, Laudato Si, and I come from a Christian Catholic tradition. To Christians, he said, Christian spirituality proposes an alternative understanding of the quality of life and encourages a prophetic and contemplative lifestyle, one capable of enjoyment, free of the obsession with consumption. We need to take up an ancient lesson found in different religious traditions and also in the Bible. The violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the sickness, the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. Climate change now is a symptom of that sickness. And he invites us to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening in the world into our own personal suffering, and thus to discover what each of us can do about it. So, Sarah, if you don't mind just clicking on the FEN website, please, not the 10 Ways one. These are questions that FEN is about. Having the eyes to see, the ears to hear, listening and learning from the sciences, from the First Nations, who have lessons to teach to those who've come later to this land, taking time to reflect on the wisdom of our faith traditions, to contemplate and take action locally and globally. Sarah's got our website up there. If you just scroll down a little bit, please, Sarah. you'll see that we're an interfaith network of people connecting faith with ecological awareness and care. If you go down a little bit further, we have a newsletter, and we also we provide resources, we hold events. We really about bringing the faith traditions together. And so when we do, we try and produce a statement about a matter that we're concerned with. More recently, since about 2021, we've really been focusing on biodiversity. And so in 2023, we had one on the topic, Ask the Earth, It Will Speak to You. And if you click on that at some stage, you'll see that coming from diverse faith perspectives and the ecological sciences, we lament the state of the lack of interconnection and interdependence that a lot of people relate to, just proceeding ahead ignorantly and unaware and unaffected. So joining with all people of goodwill who care, we share attitudes of wonder and care that offer hope. From that, we decided to develop this process as a way of forming a process that all faith traditions and none can undertake and go through. So we called it 10 Ways to Care for Biodiversity, and we set up a separate website, which is the next one, 10 Ways to Care for Biodiversity. And one of our members commissioned a permaculture artist, Brenna Quinlan, to design the 10 images for the 10 Ways, which are really artistic and wonderful to look at. But it's a framework for communities to go through this process, to listen and learn, reflect and contemplate and act together. It's a guide to encourage that process, but particularly it's a constant cyclical process. It involves that action which encourages hope. And it's in the global context of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which Australia has signed up to, call from our First Nations to heal country, and we call on faith and other communities to better care for our biodiversity. So that's just a little bit about that, the work that FEN does. We're encouraging people to share stories with us so we can share the good news. That's one of the 10 ways. And I'm very happy now to hand over to some of the people who are in FEN. We have a lot of members from other faith traditions, but today we just share 4 of them. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Anne. That was lovely. And now I'd love to introduce our next speaker, Lisa. Lisa, when you're ready, if you'd like to share screen, we'll bring you up. And I've already introduced Lisa, but while she sets up her share screen, yes, we're looking forward to Lisa talking about her work, both as someone with experience in the Catholic Church and with an Indigenous cultural background. Yeah, how are you going, Lisa? Are you all good? Excellent. And don't forget to unmute. You're doing great.
Am I all good?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for joining us, Lisa. Over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I too, as a visitor to this country, would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Gadigal people on whose country I'm sitting this afternoon and pay my respects to the ancestors of the 4 directions whose footprints are embedded in country. Honour elders who have gone before us, those who stand with us today and share their knowledge, our languages, and continue to inspire our young people. I'm so deeply grateful for their wisdom, patience, strength, and resilience in keeping our songlines strong and caring for and looking after country. In my presentation and yarn with you today, I'd like to also honour the wisdom of some of our elders. Uncle Max, he said, Mother Earth births everything for us. Father Sky carries the water and oxygen for us to breathe. Grandfather Sun warms the planet, warms our body, gives us light so we can see, raises the food that Mother births and raises most of our relations, all of our plants and trees. Grandmother Moon moves the water and gives us the woman time and our birthing. In his expression of natural phenomena, I think, lies the essence of Aboriginal kinship systems. As you know, prior to 1789, we weren't Aboriginal people. We belonged to the country, our birth country, or where our cultural education took place. We're not one homogenous group. Australia was not viewed as one country. So connections to country will differ from person to person, depending on their individual journey. Now I'm just showing off with a photo from home country, in that Aboriginal ways of seeing and knowing enables me to identify who I am, who my family is, who my ancestors are, and the country from which my motivation comes, and to be confident in how my storyline has been formed and continues to develop. This is my birth country, Ngunnawal, and a striking feature of it is Wollumbin, or what people now know as Mount Warning. This is the first place that Grandfather Sun touches Mother Earth in this land we now know as Australia. A place of great spiritual significance to my people since time immemorial. Wollumbin, along with other sites of significance in the surrounding areas, provides us with our cultural lore and places for spiritual education. I also wanted to have a look at different Aboriginal worldviews. Like all faith traditions have interwoven layers, the natural, the human, and the spiritual. And understanding these layers helps us understand the living nature of country. The natural world is a term that we use for natural phenomena, animals, plants, sea and land formations, and boundaries of Aboriginal nations. The human world, kinship is a way of being and connecting to country, family and communities, and then our spiritual world, which is based on the dreaming and the teachings of the ancestral beings and our proper behaviours. The dreaming is the basis of our spiritual connections, the spiritual concept of purpose, connected and spirit. The dreaming encompasses all spiritual knowledge, past, present, and future. It explains all life, the connections between people, land, and spirit, and is expressed through a continued journey of growth and learning. Dreaming stories are more than myths and legends. They're the way that we teach our children their connections to country. And as they grow in their understanding, so does their sense of belonging. We are a people that think across generations, so what we experience now is part of a continuum of what's gone before and what's yet to come. In talking about kinships, there is a number of different levels. Within our societies, the first is our moieties, which is a Latin word for meaning half. The moiety system, everything is within the natural world and the human world are split into half. So each half is a mirror of the other. And to understand the whole universe in Aboriginal ways of seeing, these two halves must come together. So people who share the same moiety are considered siblings and therefore forbidden to marry, but they also have reciprocal relationships to support each other. The second level of kinship is our totems. Some people can have up to 4 different totems representing the nation, their clan and their family group, as well as a personal totem. The nation, clan and family totems are preordained, whereas your personal totems recognize your individual strengths and weaknesses. Totems are also split between the two moieties, which create a form of conservation and protection so that they can be passed on to future generations. You can also be related through your totem as well. So, for example, someone who has my sister's totem would then become my sister as well. You can, and you also have connections to a number of different countries through both our kinship systems, but also our totemic relationships. For example, someone will have special responsibilities towards their grandfather or grandmother's country, depending on whether or not you follow a matriarchal or patriarchal line. The country itself will also follow a matriarchal or patriarchal line. So you then know the stories, songs and dances of that particular area. And at various times of the year, you'd go and attend gatherings and ceremonies for that place. The third level of kinship is our skin name, which is similar to what you would say your surname today, but slightly different in that it indicates what bloodline you come from and how our generations are linked and the proper behaviours when you're interacting with people from a different generation to your own. Husband and wives don't share the same name and children don't share their parents' skin names. But it's generally based on the number 8, and you can have skin name cycles with up to 32 sets of different names. Then we would have proper behaviours to those relationships. Really what it comes down to is that no child would ever be an only child, so to speak, that you'd have all your brothers and sisters and your mothers and fathers and aunties and uncles to teach you. And that's where the strength of the system comes in. Aboriginal teachings are about growing up and learning to walk with the rhythms of the land and feel the spirit within country, but this takes time to develop. So your connections are made through the physical world that you can see, your cultural education, and also making, how would you put it, putting books in your emotional library, so to speak, when you're out in country and making those connections. I think, and I'd just like to finish with a personal guide of mine, Oomera Ewards, when she says finding, which I think is really relevant to what other people in other faith formations are going to talk about today, is finding the right way for country in an Aboriginal way means there is always a proper way of doing things that takes into account the needs of people and what is right for country. This concept is based on many levels of understanding and spiritual connection to country. In this way, people walk in balance with country. There are reciprocal cycles that connect country, people, and spirit. Sites of significance are open for all to learn from when it is their time. It is a natural way of living with country. But as I said at the beginning, it's a lifelong journey. So it's not an easy task to talk about kinship and connections to country in 10 minutes. So this talking today is just more on a surface level in that we all continue our journey. But I just wanted to finish with saying that country needs people, people needs country. And I think to be able to learn to connect a country to this country is both a privilege and open to everyone. It's not just open to Aboriginal people. We all have the right to be able to connect to the country that we belong to. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was absolutely wonderful, and I do appreciate having only 10 minutes to talk about these issues. Today's goal is to enlighten us across a number of different orientations, but I'd love to have you all come back and give much longer talks and share much more detail. So thank you so much, Lisa. And as you're stopping the sharing, I'll introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much, Lisa. Dallas Campbell is going to speak with us next. And Dallas, if you'd like to share screen, you're a co-host, so you can actually share slides if you've got some, or not, whatever suits you.
Thanks, Michelle. I will share. Oh, hang on. Give me a little second. All right. Can everyone see that? Can everyone hear me okay? Beautiful. All right. Thank you for having me, guys. I would also like to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the Gadigal people of Yurunnhang Country, where I'm speaking from. And today I'm going to do my best to explain the Baha'i perspective of kinship and give some examples that inspire action in both the individual and the community. I should also note that the Baha'i faith has some very diverse quotes across many topics, and these are just a few on the topic of the environment and kinship. My initial thoughts when we got the topic of kinship was to go straight to the dictionary and look at the definition, which for the Oxford Dictionary was a blood relationship, or a sharing of characteristics, or a sharing of origins. And to me, that linked to this quote from the Baha'i writings, which goes, "O children of men, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how ye were created." And I think in so many different spiritual disciplines, or so many different ways of connecting to a creator, we are asked to reflect on the way that we're created, or reflect on many different things. But this particular quote to me says we're all made up of the same things, whether it's the same dust or the same genetics or the same atoms. Everything within this universe is cycling through and connecting us to all forms of life. And then kinship really is looking at our interdependence, and within Baha'i forms of knowing, we look a lot at the harmony between science and religion. And this quote demonstrates a view of the Earth's physical interdependence that both science as a form of knowing and religion as a form of knowing can agree upon. It goes, "For every part of the universe is connected with every other part." Sorry, my video is slightly covered by all of you lovely people. "For every part of the universe is connected with every other part by ties that are very powerful and admit of no imbalance, nor any slackening whatever." So there's this view from a universal level that we know the planets are all, their movement is all explained by physics, and then down to a micro level where we can understand that chemical reactions have to be balanced. All parts of our universe are either directly or indirectly linked together. And this interdependence can be further understood through viewing the physical relationships that exist in the world. If we look a little deeper into these relationships between all living things, we can see that the world could be likened to a single being. Even as a human body in this world, which is outwardly composed of different limbs and organs, is in reality a closely integrated, coherent entity. Similarly, the structure of the physical world is like unto a single being whose limbs and members are inseparably linked together. Of like kind are the relationships that exist among all created things. Hence it was stated that cooperation and reciprocity are essential properties which are inherent in the unified system. And this quote describes the unified or the balanced system that the earth is or should be. And if I can borrow from the example of the First Nations people, as Lisa was describing, the culture that has been able to sustain life for so many thousands of years. I was at a wetland conference through my work, And an elder spoke up with an example very similar to what's described in this quote. And we were talking about rivers, and he said, we need to view rivers like they are the blood vessels in our body. And if we were ever to pinch an artery or a blood vessel, we know it would have profound impacts on the rest of the body, in the same way that if we were to clear or stop up a river, we're going to have impacts on the rest of the water system, not just on that particular river or what is downstream of it. This is something that we're all learning, and obviously our Australian context, as it is right now, doesn't reflect this balance that we're trying to achieve. And so really, we're looking at how do we redefine this relationship, because no single group is going to have an answer to it. And we can't be contained simply to our Australian borders if we're going to combat something like climate change, which requires learnings from all nations. Yeah. So we've covered the physical relationships that exist between humanity and the earth, but Baha'is believe we also have a spiritual relationship with the earth. So a question as we read this next quote might be, what are the spiritual qualities that are being encouraged of us as we walk upon the earth? Every man of discernment, while walking upon the earth, feeleth indeed abashed or ashamed, inasmuch as he is fully aware that the thing which is the source of his prosperity, his wealth, his might, his exaltation, his advancement and power, is, as ordained by God, the very earth which is trodden beneath the feet of all men. Whoever is cognizant of this truth is cleansed from all pride, arrogance, and vainglory. So my understanding from this, and as we reflect, I think everyone can get something different out of spiritual writings, is that we're being encouraged to have an attitude of humility. The fact that the earth has so much power and yet somehow we're able to walk on top of it really is just pulling us back into the practicality of being earth-centered, as we've started talking about in this meeting. If we can have an attitude of humility, remove our arrogance, then these kind of qualities of respect are going to lead us to action. There's a lot of community Baha'i activities that center around the oneness of humankind, trying to build a better world and use these qualities of humility that inspire us, I suppose. And if we are able to be united as a larger group, then the actions that we take are going to have so much more power behind them. Initiatives focus on the following concepts, such as universal participation, where everyone as a form of justice is able to partake in what's happening around us, feel they can contribute to the change that we're trying to build. Grassroots capacity building, believing that each individual has qualities within them, latent, that can be brought out if we can, through education, build them. The harmony of science and religion, and these different forms of knowing that we've already talked a little bit about, and operating in a learning mode, which really is this humility that we've just talked about, where no one person is going to have the answer, no one group is going to have the answer. We all need to be consulting together on what these solutions look like if we're going to build this united system. And this is an individual initiative that sprung out of these beliefs. Richard St. Barbe Baker was the founder of Men of the Trees, and he's one of the first, or possibly the first, global conservationist. He went all over the country building a legacy and trying to use kinship within his work. He engaged with First Nations groups across the globe, listening intently and then sharing both scientific and spiritual principles. And there are forests the world over that still stand because of his vision. There are currently books about his life that Jane Goodall and King Charles have contributed to as well. He was a pioneering visionary. At a community level, some initiatives in the Baha'i world are pictured below. At the moment, there are 39 ongoing environmental and agricultural initiatives that have been Baha'i inspired across Australia, and across the world there are thousands. The bottom two are from two Queensland suburbs, I think Gracemere on the left and in the middle Sippy Downs, and on the right hand corner is a example of an initiative in Vanuatu. And all of these community initiatives have at their heart a grassroots level action where people have come together asking questions, wanting to solve a problem or have this consultation about, what are we going to do? I think for this central one, there was an initiative that said, we're seeing people with maybe it's isolation problems of loneliness or mental health or youth disconnection, and how are we going to bring them together? And by asking these questions and really trying to learn together, a community garden was planned, which then snowballed and became, we need some more space. And then it grew with the local council to having a bit more space, and more friends are getting involved, which not only creates nature education, but really it's using the healing power of nature to connect these different souls that then create community around it.
Thanks, Dallas. We're actually out of time. Did you want to just quickly wrap up and I'll go to our next speaker? I hate to interrupt, but we are, yeah.
No, thank you very much. That was pretty much my last slide. I was just going to say there's more information about these activities with the code, but thank you all for your time.
No, wonderful. Thank you. And we'll come back after everyone speaks for some questions and discussions. So thank you so much, Dallas. And if you'd like to stop sharing now, that would be lovely. And now I'm very delighted to introduce Mehmet to join us. And I know he doesn't have slides. Over to you, Mehmet. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I also do acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we all stand. I really want to thank the organizers for choosing this topic. The kinship, our connection with the natural world, is an angle that I haven't really thought about until this event, or maybe I haven't thought about it from a different perspective. I think this is great in that respect. So previously, I looked at and written on Islam environment relationship, mainly from a theological perspective. And also last few years, I also extended that ethical aspect. I think that was missing as well. I wrote an op-ed on with at COP26, highlighting that Muslim countries must act on correcting damage done through climate change, not just talk about, the theological aspects. So in the literature on environment and climate change from an Islamic perspective, that was missing. And thankfully, my writings and most recently, a publication called El Mizan. I really encourage you to look up for that. It's available online. It's a very lengthy piece of text that makes a very comprehensive analysis of our condition. But this kinship topic, it goes in a different tangent, and I really think is a good one, because it makes us think about our personal relationship to the environment. And when we do that, what we realize is that we don't have a connection. We have become strangers to the natural world out there. I think we must begin as people belonging to different religions. We must begin by acknowledging the reality, ontological reality of our condition on earth. And when we do that, and when I say, because the word kinship means you have a relationship, a close relationship, but in our time, we have become the opposite, strangers. So what really causes this to become strangers to the environment or to the natural world around us is what we have been doing for thousands of years as human beings. We have built these cities and buildings and a life, comfortable life in those dwellings that we reside in even right now. That are the whole purpose of creation of buildings and cities was to detach from the natural, I guess the harmful, aspects of the natural world so that we can sleep. These are all good. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the result, the outcome of it is that, especially in large cities, is that we are completely detached from the natural environment, other than just trees on our streets. We have buildings, square buildings, concrete, paved bitumen roads. And so we have added a layer of artificialness to the world. And Quran calls this dunya. Whenever Quran talks about the world, it uses two different words. One is dunya, the other one is ard. Ard as in A-R-D. Dunya, the Quran always talks about the dunya in a negative light. Because this is the artificial world that we have created for ourselves. And also, a lot of the human desires are linked to this. Acquisition of wealth, for example, is only possible in a world that we have created for ourselves. Power, the temptations for power is also linked to large cities, emergence of large cities, and then nation states and empires and so on. So all of these negative aspects of human desires are linked to this artificial world. And on top of that, there's another layer of artificialness that we have created in the last few decades, internet and social media. So not only we are in artificial cities and comfortable lives detached from the natural world, there's also we are embedded with this online social media, scrolling. It's just adds another layer to that, and which further moves us away from the natural world. I think this is very significant. It's a big problem that we all face. Just like climate change is a problem for the whole world, it touches on everybody in its damage of the planet. This living in artificial worlds, detached from the natural world, is a disease almost. But we have to really, because like Islam does have, for example, very nice, when it talks about ard, the earth, it talks about it in a very positive sense, that God's creativity is placed in it. And from that perspective, earth is a focal point of God's creativity, and it's immense. The diversity of life and how complex it is amazing. It's almost equal to the entire universe, not in scale, but in terms of creativity. And so that's why the Quran says Rabbus samawati wal ard, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and then singles out the earth from the cosmos. But still, it says and, it touches it. Earth is part of cosmos, but it's so that with its natural world, with the diversity of life and the creativity displayed on it, that human beings are placed on this like a tender child. And then we're charged with this concept of being caliph. Quran talks about humans are created as caliphs on earth, as vicegerents, as that we are being trusted with something that no other creature would take, and that we are charged with the care of the planet. But this is only possible if we are connected to the natural world. The moment we are disconnected, we forget about all these things, don't we? There's no reason for us to reflect. So we're in this state of what's called in Islamic spirituality ghafla. Like ghafla is to be in a state where you forget about God, that God is absent in our lives, and that there's no worship, there's no connection with revelation. But I really think that we're in a state of ghafla in respect to the natural world, which makes us forget about its significance and the teachings that there is in our Quran, and specifically in the case of Islam, and that we don't feel any ethical responsibility to look after it. So the solution to this is that we must all connect to the natural world. And for that reason, for instance, we, in our own organization, we organize regular visits to the kind of like a morning dhikr. Dhikr is called remembrance, where we hike somewhere just on sunrise, after performing the prayers, we do remembrance of God together with the birds as the sun rises. That connects us to the natural world. One thing that we have done, we also do, I'm a bit of a cyclist for the last 4 years or so. I've been cycling, so we go early in the morning and we always ride to somewhere near on the coastline and we connect with the creation. I've been really, that's been fantastic, transformative for me personally and my friends who've been involved in that. But we also recently have done sighting of the moon in Ramadan in March. We organized with Sydney Observatory, where we have, the beginning of the fast month of Ramadan starts with the sighting of the crescent, first crescent of the month. And we organized that with the telescopes and everything. It was such a wonderful experience. I've never done that, to be honest. That was the first time we did that purposefully. And I really found that I connected with the natural world with that. So we're going to repeat that every year from now on. Before I used to think with just astronomical calculations, we can just calculate, beginning of the month. It's easy. But that ritual of observing the crescent was really excellent. I think that was because maybe I was disconnected with the natural world. I think Islam does have wonderful theology of connection with the natural world. It gives responsibility to look after the planet, but none of these are possible unless we connect and we feel our kinship with the natural world. And so these are some of my reflections on this topic, and I hope to talk further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mehmet. That was a very rich and thoughtful insight. And I've got some questions for all of you, actually, which we'll come back to shortly. Thank you so much. And now, last but not least, thank you for your patience, Sally. It's often hard but fun to be the last speaker. Sally and I have known each other for a very long time, as I've known Anne. So in addition to our lovely new friends today, it's a delight to bring Sally into this conversation. So over to you, my lovely friend.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, I grew up in Victoria, but I'm here today in Bathurst in New South Wales because I came here to work for the Sisters of Mercy 10 years ago. And the program that we had running here, actually, it was a ministry called Rahamim Ecology Centre. Rahamim is one of the biblical words for mercy, and it means womb compassion. So it's a beautiful, it's one of the many biblical words for mercy. And you can just imagine the womb compassion, very feminine, very involved with creation, the creative ongoing act. And so I just want to say hi to all the Sisters of Mercy on this call and Mercy friends who are here. And thank you for your work, trailblazing work really in integral ecology. I'm now the integral ecology animator, is my official title. And basically that means when I go back to where I grew up on the banks of the Tambo River, I was passionate about two things. One was religion. I was fascinated by religion and very much involved as my parents took me to church all the time. They were heavily involved in the church. And the other thing that I felt strongly about was that place on the Tambo River in East Gippsland where I grew up on a farm. So all the animals, the plants, the mountains, the river, the ocean close by, so much of that I felt so strongly about, but no one had actually pointed out to me the connections between those two. No one had pointed that out. And it's really only around the time I met Michelle, which I think was about 13 years ago, that these two started to integrate for me in my life. And that was thanks to a bit of a a bit of a fringe group in a way called Earth Song, and hi to all the Earth Song friends as well. Earth Song in Melbourne, led by Pat Long and Anne Boyd. Anne Boyd was a Brigidine sister, and she used to be quite amazed that her programs, which linked creation and the evolution of the universe to the religious tradition we're part of, she used to emphasize to me that it's part of the tradition. It's always been part of the tradition. And there's this ancient lineage that we have within our tradition. And yet her programs were being banned within parishes within the Archdiocese of Melbourne, which made no sense. So I'm not an expert on this topic, but I'll just share a couple of slides that sort of maybe help to explain some of the split that we've ended up with here. And there are many on this call who are far more authoritative on this topic than I. But basically what I discovered was that kinship in the Christian church, if you like, and much more than that even, it's a sense of the divine revealing the divine self through this created material world. A code word for it is deep incarnation. Which basically means in the Christian tradition, okay, so Christ has been part of this world in matter, which is revealing God to us all the time. And it wasn't just at the time of the birth of the person, Jesus, that has always been part of this world. So, and this is a biblical sense. But so the writings of Paul carried that very strongly. But when the church became an official empirical religion, at that time, when it became the official religion of Rome, so much of our church got caught up in the patriarchy and the power over and those sorts of dominant systems. And then also the split of the church from east to west. So when the two leaders of the churches did a kind thing and excommunicated each other, they actually lost a lot. We in the Western church lost that sense of being very close to earth that the Eastern religions still maintain. And so really it was from that time until the 1960s that we started to question some of those structures in the church and some of that spirituality that wasn't very helpful at all for Earth. So, and you can think that in many ways the Christian church has been part of the problem, has been part of the damage, because we've been emphasizing that power over structure far too much, and also the patriarchal structure. And so after the 1960s, and we started to expand more into, say, liberation theology, so working with those who are rendered poor, other humans. And then from there, as one of the Sisters of Mercy here in Bathurst, Patricia Powell often says, you can't really have justice for humans if there's no planet for those humans. So it extends for a number of reasons. And then, of course, in 2015, Laudato Si came out with Pope Francis, and he wrote a follow-up to that called Laudato Deum in 2023 for one of the COP meetings. There were exceptions, though, that maintained that thread that Anne Boyd was talking about, and they're the Celtic traditions. So they were not so heavily caught up in the Roman Empire. So they were able to maintain this connection to earth. And then there was, of course, the Franciscan tradition that strongly maintained it. The mystics, you can think of, say, Hildegard of Bingen as an example, and many, many other mystics. Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry, as well as many others who many of you would know, who had this connection with science and the natural world and linked it to a kind of religious understanding as well. So I'm very pleased in my work that it's part of an integrated kinship that we're seeking and that we're trying to revive in our tradition. This image of St. Francis, obviously St. Francis is a really good example in our tradition of how kinship is experienced. And this is the story of the wolf of Gubbio in Italy. So the wolf in this town, Gubbio, was terrorizing the villagers, and they wanted to get rid of this wolf, and it was too much of a big problem. But St. Francis' approach was to turn to the wolf and actually listen to the wolf and say, what is it that you need? Okay, so and of course we know that St. Francis regarded all in the material world as kin. And so when he speaks to the wolf and listens to the wolf, he discovers, what does the wolf need? Food. So the wolf is terrorizing the neighborhood because it's hungry. So by feeding the wolf regularly, the town were able to live peacefully again. And so very simple story, very famous story, but says so much about our tradition and how, listening to the natural world as kin can really improve the relationships with the whole web of life. Now, coming back to Pope Francis, so we're still in this era, 2015, so 10 years we're celebrating of Laudato Si. The big newness about this document that came out was these 4 things. For the first time, the church recognized that creation is intrinsically valuable, that it's not just valuable for us humans. Pope Francis also said we're part of nature, we're included in it, can never be separate from it, as some of the other speakers have said that's common to them as well. That creation reveals God to us. And I've mentioned that phrase, deep incarnation. So in the incarnate world, when Jesus becomes and Christ is incarnate, that applies to all matter. All matter is sacred and reveals God to us. And then Pope Francis was really interested in ecological spirituality. He says not because of concepts or language as such, but for how it can motivate action. And then in 2023, he updated it and said, look, now we've spent too long doing nothing. Earth is now reaching a breaking point. So our responses have been inadequate up to this point. So I have been trying to respond to that myself and with a number of groups that I'm in. And I want to thank Ayla for educating me and many people on bioregioning. And this has really been a game changer for my thinking. This is basically where we think about our local places, where maybe we have a spiritual, cultural connection to a place. Maybe it's a different ecological landscape. Maybe it's a watershed, like you see here, the highest point of the land where the water flows down to reach a single point. If we, in our own bioregions, make sure that our water is clean and our forests are all intact and we are able to receive as much as we possibly can for our daily life's needs from this bioregion, this is the way that humans have lived successfully for 99.9% of our existence. So it makes sense to return to this way of thinking, and I think this way of thinking is really inspired. And also it's not like we have to take on the whole world's problems then as well. So it's less overwhelming and more doable. Just thinking about where I am, there's Bathurst roughly in the middle, Orange, and further west, there's a little town that got devastated by a flood called Ewards. Totally devastated. There it is circled in red. And the red line is a little creek, Mandadgery Creek. And you can see that there's a few other creeks around and there's a choke point in there. Ewards suffered a terrible flood in November 2022. They said it was a 1 in 5,000 year event. So this is just down the road from us, and the Sisters of Mercy actually were willing to try an ecological response to this terrible, devastating flood. So what we did was work with farmers and local experts and identified areas of, that were really causing problems. The speed of the water was the issue. And so the farming practices in the area had actually made that worse, far worse. So we see creeks in this sort of condition. And of course, it just channels the water and makes it extremely dangerous. So we got a lot of the farmers together and also different other stakeholders. And we thought about this and we asked what's needed. We asked everyone to write down 3 things that are needed. And everyone said education. So we actually got Sisters of Mercy grant from Ireland. And a lot of Sisters of Mercy came and helped us run these education programs with some experts, the Malone Institute, who taught us how to slow the flow of the water. So we called it Slow the Flow Ewards. And yeah, quite a number of education programs happened and people started experimenting with the techniques. And then that group was so passionate, they formed their own land care group. So now that work that was motivated by our spirituality is actually having impacts on the ground in a post-disaster situation, and it's building more resilience in that bioregion.
Fantastic. Just about out of time, Sally.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Thank you, Lon.
Yeah, I'll just finish off by saying our own little Diocese of Bathurst thinks of itself as a bioregion too, and we've been starting a whole lot of education programs at the Blaney Eco Hub, and you're more than welcome to come and visit and hear about our programs in permaculture and other resilient building techniques. Thank you.
Oh, that is just fantastic. And personally, I'm so excited that some of Ayla's work has also inspired you to think differently or more beautifully about bioregions. So thank you for that feedback. It's wonderful. I really regret we didn't turn this into a whole day event, but let's do that one day in the future. What I'd now like to do is some questions have been coming through in private messages to us and also in the general chat. So we'll do our best to cover what we can in about 20 minutes. If it's okay, what I'd like to do is pose one question to each of our speakers first, and then we have one or two questions for all of you, and we'll just see how we go for time. So a first question for you, Lisa, and thank you. Sometimes the first speaker has to be reminded that what they talked about by the time we finish in a long panel, don't we? Lisa, I'm personally fascinated in how the ancient, rich cultural traditions and worldview of Aboriginal peoples was influenced by the Catholic and Christian churches, and you're in a remarkable position where you're connected to both so deeply. I wonder if you can comment a little bit on, because this webinar is really about faith-based perspectives on our relationships with nature, can you talk a little bit about either the differences or the similarities, or how did or does Christianity fit with Aboriginal worldviews? I was told by elders like Mary Graham that Aboriginal people didn't worship nature, it was just profoundly sacralized because it was so important. So how did all that fit together when colonization happened? Was much lost, or were ideas gained? What are your thoughts, if that's okay as a question?
Okay, that's a huge question, but all good. I think there's a whole spectrum of answers to that, and largely it's due to consequences of history. So I think with a lot of families and stuff, it would depend on what denomination was kind of in the town at the time, to where you have connections to that sort of church. And so you've got, a whole spectrum, as I said. So you've got people that solely believe in Aboriginal spirituality, and that's their view, a combination of both, and you can make connections between both. And then to the complete other end of, that it just being, whether it be, an established sort of religion and have no connection. And largely the disconnection is going to go back to like stolen generations and people being removed at young ages, but also the fact that it was forbidden to speak language or perform ceremonies and stuff. So some communities that aren't affected as much, and I think it's in some cases largely to do with language and stuff as well, in that people that maintained their language were compared to, and don't get me wrong, a lot of languages are being revitalized and stuff, but we've got to remember there's like 350 different languages across the country. It's one of the questions I often get asked still today, what is the Aboriginal language? There isn't, So I think it's very depending on your family history and stuff and connections to that place, and whether or not you have the older aunts and uncles to pass on that information. In that some communities will have story but may not have the law behind it, whereas others, still have language and are thriving. So in the cultural sense. But also you've got to look at the effect on communities by like missions and reserves and things like that as well. And I think the combination of both, say, because I work in the Aboriginal Catholic ministry, is, people looking for connection and making connections between the two. And, I shared the Madonna and Child on the first slide, which is by Richard Campbell. We are also very honoured to host the, his Stations of the Cross. And as I said, that was him returning back to, like, starting with his father and stuff, but returning back to, and a process of healing for himself, as well as the Passions of Christ. So, I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not.
Oh, it definitely did, and I do appreciate the tiny amount of time we have to discuss these important issues. So thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
A quick question for Dallas now, and I will come back with some questions for everybody. But Dallas, if it's okay, someone's asked a question about the origins of Baha'i. They hadn't heard of it before, and it sounds beautiful. How did it come to be, and how did it come to be able to unite different worldviews together? That's the question. And don't forget, if you're on mute, to unmute. It's for Dallas.
That's a really great question. And I guess the Baha'is believe in progressive revelation, much like many religions build on each other, and this idea that each prophet has come at a different time of humanity to teach what are the lessons from one God. Much like as we go through school, we have a different teacher for a different time of our life. They build on the same message, just at a time when we can take it in more. So Baha'is believe the most recent prophet came 200 years ago out of Iran, and then that has spread across the world, and those teachings have been taken to every country around the world now.
Well, thank you, and a very efficient answer too. Thanks so much. We had several questions for Mehmet. Let me just find one that captures the essence of things, perhaps. We have a question here saying, thank you, Mehmet. It's so interesting to hear of your own ecological awakening through physical experiences of connecting with the natural world. How do we ensure young people have these opportunities as well as access to the theological teachings?
Yes, firstly, we have to talk about it. And I actually came up with this idea of doing one sermon in a year in mosques, all about environment. Like Muslim, like Friday prayer is very important, and it's really popular. A lot of people attend it. Literally half of the population probably in Australia. So if we can do a sermon of that nature, so we just need constant reminder. Hopefully I can appreciate that, and maybe we need a campaign like that. And also teaching them in schools is very important. The environmental awareness amongst the young is very high. We don't need necessarily religious teachings. Thankfully, schools do a good job, and there's a lot of awareness online. But I think what's lacking is that connection. They just need to be taken out to the natural world rather than spend time on their phones or iPads. You know, I have grandchildren at the moment, just new, and what we're doing is that we're taking them out every day to play in some sort of a natural setting. I think people who are in leadership of organizations, places of worship, need to take active lead on this, and we need to write and speak about it. It's also very important for our spiritual well-being. You know, when we're disconnected with the world, with the natural world, we're not happy. You know, there's something is missing there. But a lot of people, they say the moment like when they go to a beach or they see the sound of waves, just that fresh air, the sun, they feel at peace. And they always say, I should do this more often. But they don't do it because, once again, the gravity of the artificial world that we have created is very strong, unfortunately.
Oh, I love that. The gravity of the artificial world we have created. That's fantastic. And what you say, Mehmet, and what many have said really resonates with anyone who's read Thomas Berry. You know, he critiques these underpinning structures of the industrialized world and looks across different ways that we've disconnected. There's a deep resonance there. Obviously, with an audience like this today, I'm sure that we are probably not disconnected, but many people definitely in our society. And can I just make a little addition? Something we've observed through our work inside AILA is younger people are absolutely environmentally aware. And we've had 30 or 40 years of really successful environmental education in Australia. And you know, something we've really noticed with young people, it's when they go into the workforce that they are literally forced to take on a different ethical view and a different life. What we've had is over the last 10 years, we've probably had around 300 student interns, an endless sort of wonderful parade of different folk coming through. And many of them have said they grew up with an environmental ethic. They did law or this subject or that subject to care for the environment. Then when they went into the mainstream world, it was literally pushed out of them. One guy said he didn't even get a second interview because he'd mentioned he was interested in environmental law and environmental issues, and this law firm thought that perhaps he might be too radical for them. So I think as grown-ups, maybe definitely continue the environmental education for young'uns, but I think our adults need more compassionate environmental workplaces and such. So anyway, couldn't agree more though in terms of getting folks out of the inside and out to the outside to honour and enjoy. Wonderful comments. Now, Sally, I think you know that I'm a huge fan of Laudato Si. So a question for you is, what do you think has been the longer term impact of Laudato Si on the Catholic and Christian world, or beyond that even? I was a huge fan of the Pope's work and thinking, just an absolute breath of fresh air, but would love some reflections now that I didn't realize it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
Time flies. Yeah.
Well, one little spark of hope is I'm part of a group with Catholic Religious Australia. It's all the different religious orders. And we're celebrating the 10th anniversary with a tree planting project called 10,000 for 10. And so we're getting all the religious orders and their schools and all their ministries, if they can, to plant thousands of trees. That, as part of the core business of being part of our religious faith, that's something that I'd never heard of before Laudato Si, really. Though there were pockets of it, as I mentioned, different fringe groups doing things for a long time. But yeah, I think it is fair to say that I still meet a lot of Catholic people who've never heard of Laudato Si, never read it. And certainly there's a long way to go as well.
And that all comes down to that awareness, isn't it? That endless education. Towards the end, Anne, I might ask you to give some final comments and reminders about your 10 ways to care. But right now, what I'd like to do is share with our speakers just 2 questions that, if any or all of you would like to respond, that would be wonderful. I was wondering if you could all perhaps just share one quick thought, that sounds terrible, of a sharing about how your own faith or worldview has added to your lives through either a story or just an observation. I think Mehmet's story about the ceremonies of going to see the moon. I mean, that's a beautiful one. Did you want to pick up from there, Mehmet, about how your faith has inspired, or how nature has inspired your faith, that interactive relationship? And then perhaps if anyone else would like to share a short story.
Yeah, we need connection with the natural world, and the best way to do that is a religious connection, something spiritual, something deep. It resonates with our heart, and also daily practices of our religion. Like Muslims pray 5 times a day, and the times are allocated according to movement of the sun. So with the sun, just before sunrise is the morning prayer. There's an evening prayer just after sunset, for example. So that naturally, sun doesn't have any like theological or religious significance itself, but just that it marks certain time periods during the day, and that splits that into 5. So a person who prays 5 times a day, you're invariably linked to the natural world. Maybe tangentially, I'm not saying that it's a good link, but nevertheless, it's not completely broken. So we are broken souls on this planet, living in broken lives, and I think our connection with the world, the more we connect with the natural world, the more healing comes.
Thank you, Mehmet. Other speakers got any thoughts on how your own faith, or how nature has inspired your faith, or faith has inspired your love of nature? Go in, Sally.
Yeah, I just when you said that, I remembered experiences where Earth Song sisters, and especially a sister of Mercy called Margie Abbott, when I first met her, she was leading earth rituals, designing, they were somewhat inspired by rituals that we might have in the Catholic tradition, such as laments or psalms and that sort of thing. That bits of that would come in, but it was explicitly earth-centered. And I remember just crying. I couldn't stop crying the first several times I went to these rituals, these earth rituals. And something about it just felt so meaningful and good to do.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sally. And Anne, did you want to share?
I'm the coordinator of FEN, but my motivation comes from a religious motivation. And I'm part of a little church community near the Baha'i temple in the same bioregion. We have a creek running across the property, and it's a large piece of land. So from my faith tradition, having the creek inspires the connectivity and interconnectedness of where we are. So what Dallas was talking about. And so the motivation at the moment is there's a lot of development applications going on around us that are totally inappropriate for the health of that creek. So we're collaborating with another land care group further down that's on Crown land in working on growing a creek community and challenging these landholders who think of the land totally in terms of how much, what Mehmet's talking about, they can put on that space. We're approaching it from this connectivity, kinship connection, from our faith tradition as a church community, to try and approach them to care for the whole creek. So this is where the kinship and interconnectedness comes in.
Fantastic. Mary Graham would say that that's the best way, that earth ethics is a doing thing. We can talk, we can think, we can mumble to ourselves in the shower about it, but we can lament, but it's the doing things that are wonderful, isn't it? Thank you so much. Lisa or Dallas, did you have anything you want to jump in with? Otherwise, I've got a terrific question for our final one. I'm sure you'll love it. Yes, please, Dallas.
Firstly, I was going to say, Anne, I'll have to come and visit you and we can continue talking about this community working around this creek line. That's fantastic. I was gonna say that my faith has probably inspired me with the environment and feeling this strong connection to God, in that the faith strongly believes that everyone says prayers in their own way. You know, that relationship between you and God can be in your house. It doesn't have to be a particular location that we pray in. And one of those is that nature is a way of viewing different aspects of God and feeling close to God. And so for me, even though I live at the temple, there's actually a wetland by the temple that I like to say prayers at, because it feels that I'm, you know, in a very spiritual place either way. And so I think a lot of us with that connection to nature feel a strong sense of reverence and a strong sense of being able to pray. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's lovely. Wetlands and marshlands and all those liminal spaces in between things, they have been sacred for a very, very, very long time in humans' culture. Lisa, did you have any final thoughts on that question? How your love of nature inspires your faith or vice versa?
I think, yeah, I've got an Aboriginal grandmother, an English grandmother, and also got South Sea Islander heritage. But both my grandparents were very strong and resilient and Catholic, very Catholic. So, you know, I was brought up Catholic as well. But then, and I've also had the opportunity, you know, over 20 years ago to work with Oomera Edwards and develop a program called Guyunggu, which was about teaching teachers how to teach primary school kids how to connect to country. So through that experience in the Broken Bay Diocese, like, it still kind of influences my personal and professional life now. So they would be the two incidents that I think that can connect both.
Absolutely. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. As I said, we could have a conversation around these issues for many hours. And in the past, Ayla has hosted entire 1- and 2-day conferences and discussions around earth spirituality. And perhaps we might have to reinvigorate that next year. We're running out of time for any further questions, but I guess what I would have posed, and perhaps it's just something we can leave people to ponder, is that in the 2021 census for Australia, about 40% of people said that they had no religion. And for me, someone who grew up in the Catholic tradition and the Christian-dominated world, who is a little agnostic and all over the place with her spirituality, I think it's almost a call for people to connect with nature in any way they can, to see God wherever they can. And I would certainly invite anyone who's listening today to engage in all of the different faiths and beliefs around the world that inspire you to care for nature, because I think whatever faith you come from, the love of the living world, I think, is an inherent thing that children are born with, the way they love puppies, the way they love butterflies. And it's our societies that unfortunately push away those priorities. So on that note, and it's not a question, it was just a general pondering, I'm actually going to take a quick moment to remind people that the Australian Earth Laws Alliance has got, oh goodness me, I'm all over the shop now. Where's my thing? There's my thing. We've got some lovely courses coming up. And if money's a problem, we use these little courses to help fund some of our work. But we've got an introduction to Earth Laws, which includes Mary Graham, an Indigenous elder, talking about Indigenous first laws, rights of nature, and Earth-Centered Futures, which has a range of lenses for looking into our connections with the living world, and what we can do about our concerns, our fears, and our passion for nature. And for those also interested, we do an Intro to Decol course later in the year. I want to mention them because they are part of our offerings as a group of people who are passionate about getting everyone not only in love with nature, but then when they get up each day, doing something good to support nature, because loving nature and then going off to work for a coal mine is not perhaps what we really want for our future. Love, spirituality, care and concern, that daily ethic is something that we're really interested in inspiring. So that's enough of my little commercial for Ayla. I'd now like to do a huge thank you to all of our speakers, Anne, Sally, Lisa, Mehmet and Dallas. It's been an absolute delight hearing from you. Let's all stay in touch because I'd love to have these conversations on offer more often into the future. I think we all need it. And perhaps I could close by just inviting you all to think about not just your own personal relationship with nature, which I'm sure is rich and beautiful, but how do we help to support and inspire others? So go back to your church, your mosque, your marshland, talk to other human beings and get them loving the good stuff. And we're going to send an email to everyone to thank you all for being part of our gathering today, and we will share the Faith Ecology Network's websites and the How to Care, and then offer many wonderful workshops, discussions and activities. On that note, I will have to rushedly close because it's now 1:33 on the Western clock. But thank you so much, everybody. This has been a wonderful and rich conversation, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Michelle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon. Go out there and hug a
Thank
tree or
you.
look at a bee.